Well, it's an honor to be here and to have the Clinton name right behind me. I want to first thank all of you. I want to thank the Arkansas Symphony and Philip Mann for your tremendous courage and foresight in creating a Composer of the Year for each one of your seasons. I think that is one of the best ways to stay current, to be involved in the culture and activities and what's cool and hip of your time. And I'm thrilled that this year you're welcoming John Coriano, who is a dear friend, a brilliant, brilliant composer, and one of the great creative minds of our time. I'm looking forward to being able to share with you the concerto that he wrote for me called Troubadours. And Troubadours is inspired by the 13th century tradition in Provençal, France, of the troubadours, who flourished, then during Civil War fell out of favor. Many were persecuted and killed, and it's an interesting way that he has expressed that by taking a two-measure fragment by a famous female troubadour composer, the Countess Beatrice del Dia, and fashioning from her Achantar song a set of free-form variations. So there's a dance band that plays off stage as well. And the piece begins in a major key, which is evocative of the happy times of the troubadours. And then at the end, when it resurfaces in the minor key, you feel that sense of sadness and loss. And you'll be able to see John Coriano for a moment in the clip we're going to show shortly, a 4-minute trailer from a new documentary that borrows its name, inspired by John's concerto. It's called Sharon Isbin Troubadour. And in this context, I'm not from the 13th century, nor am I a singer, songwriter, or poet, but I use the guitar in that way to carry my song and my music throughout the world. I'd like to introduce a little bit about this film. It began over 6 years ago. Nobody knew it would take so long. And what's a funny story about how things happen by chance, I'd been invited by the composer John Williams to come to a rehearsal of his at the New York Philharmonic. And while I was watching him rehearse, there were a series of videos that were playing that he was conducting to. And at one point, I was so overwhelmed by the beauty of these videos, I exclaimed, "That's extraordinary. Who did that?" And a voice behind me said, "I did." I turned around. There was only one other person in the entire Avery Fisher Hall because it was a rehearsal. It turned out to be the producer, Susan Dangle, who has worked for many years with John Williams as his videographer. So we began to talk after the rehearsal, and the idea of a documentary came up. 5 years later, after filming and another year of post-production, here we are. It's about to launch next week. It's being presented by American Public Television, and it will be carried by nearly 200 public television stations throughout the United States. And I understand it will be carried here in Little Rock by your public television station. So when you get home today, call them and find out what day it will be, because all of these are airing on dates and times of their own choice throughout November and December, and some into January. It was really an honor to work with Susan because of her creative insight. And what was really rather funny is that I think we both imagined this would take about a year to do, but then things kept happening. The White House asked me to play in 2009. I was asked to play at the Grammys, Garrison Keillor. One thing after another kept coming up, and Susan said, "Well, we have to film that." And we were very lucky to be able to be working together during this particularly fertile time. I also wanted to make sure we made this documentary before my face fell. I think we accomplished that. I don't know if you can tell any kind of gradations along the way for the 5 years, but it was very exciting to not have any idea what we were going to be doing from day one, and then having it all unfold in the most extraordinary way. So you'll see that some of the participants are not musicians, but friends with whom I share a common interest. Dedication to our craft, our art, people like Martina Navratilova, David Hyde Pierce even makes a cameo appearance, and of course musicians from a wide variety of genres that represent not only classical but popular music, jazz, folk, bluegrass, with artists like Joan Baez and Mark O'Connor, Stanley Jordan, and Paul Winter, Tiago de Mello, many others. Composers are well represented, and it's almost like being a fly on the wall to be able to see, when you watch this documentary, the interactions that happen that you never get to see when you are an audience member sitting in the hall. And it's that special alchemy and that special magic when we're both seeking something and trying to figure out what the other really wants and finding a way to make that happen. And you are there. And that's one of the beauties of the way the production happened. It is really unfolds very naturally, as if you are an eavesdropper. So maybe what I'd like to do now is give you the 4-minute trailer and then open the room to questions. Here we go. When people make things look effortless, that's when you know they're really good, you know, when they make it look easy.
Oh, she's so intense.
The greatest classical guitar player in the world.
Sharon's father promised her that if she practiced guitar for an hour, she could go outside and launch her model rockets.
When I first heard Sharon, I was blown away by things she could do that I'd never heard another guitarist do.
She's really the face of classical guitar these days.
There's thousands of little girls out there who've seen Sharon who now know that that's open to them. That's huge.
As a guitarist, I was always aware that it was an instrument that had to catch up. It was newer in the world. We didn't have Chopin, Mozart, Beethoven. I always felt like I want more. I want more to play.
Sharon must have come over to me at a party and said, "Hi, I'm Sharon Isbin, I want a concerto."
What I said was, "Would you consider writing a piece for me?" And he said, "I'm a little busy right now. Call me next year."
She persisted.
Year after year, after 8 years.
I know absolutely nothing about the guitar. I had good reason to say no.
I said, how am I going to get this guy to write for me? So sad here. I suddenly thought, why not the French troubadours? I'll be the troubadour.
Yeah. So I listened to troubadour music, and I found things about it that I could adopt into a set of variations, concerto.
I like that zoom. I like this.
So what do I think of when I do that? What is that coming from? Whenever I'm working with a composer and they're writing something new I've never heard before, it's a gamble. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if you're even going to like it.
It's a bum, ba, bum, bum, bim, bum.
So a whistle.
Yeah.
Tan Dunn said, I really like the idea of writing something that would combine the history of the Spanish guitar with the ancient Chinese lute, or pipa.
She never says no to me. I try whatever I want to try.
Dim, 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 dim.
Christopher Rouse teaches at Juilliard and is one of the leading composers of his generation, and I'm sure she tackled him in the hall and said, I'm not letting you up until you write me a concerto.
One of the things I remember asking you to do was to write something that had not only virtuosity, but something that would be really, really beautiful and meltingly lyrical. I'm really proud when I can say I've done this concerto by Chris almost 60 times. It's really great to be able to give birth to something and nurture it through its lifetime.
If you should Google the words classical guitar, female, one name, Sharon Isbin. She's here with us tonight.
You know, there's always a duality with this instrument and being a woman playing it. In the guitar world, I always had to fight as a woman, and in the music world, I always had to fight as a guitarist. I just got word regarding your station here. Let's see. AETN, does that make sense? Okay, AETN in Little Rock recorded the documentary. They had a stream on Sunday to all the stations, and they'll add it in January. So if you call them and ask the programmer to let you know when in January, your grassroots effort will help make that happen. And as you can see, there's a lot of humor in the approach to doing this, and that was one of the things I asked Susan. I said, make it funny. So I count at least a dozen times where people out and out laugh out loud during the show, and in the right places, of course. And there's a moment when Steve Vai talks about how what he does, he's being the rock guitar guru that he is on his electric guitar, and my world, which is quite different. He said, well, it's actually like beef yogurt. And there's a funny scene with David Hyde Pierce, who actually happens to be my neighbor and complains about the flamenco dancing that goes on all the time in my apartment. The documentary will be released by the end of the year, and you can pre-order it now on Video Artist International with extra bonus material. And there's also a new 5-CD box set of music that is included, that includes a lot of what is played live. Everything in the film is played live, including in a piazza in Italy with people walking by. It's called 5 Classic Albums. It was just released 2 weeks ago on Warner Classics. So all of this that'll be available at the concerts on tomorrow night and Saturday. So I'd like to open this up to questions. Anybody have any questions? Something you've always wanted to know about the guitar that you didn't?
I enjoyed the trailer very much. That's lovely. And in it you say that as a guitarist, you always had to fight being a woman, and as a classical musician, you had to fight playing the guitar. What were some of the challenges on both, and which was harder?
Well, I'll give you an example of the first composer that I ever asked to write for me. I was 17 years old, a naive 17-year-old, and I'd heard a composer from Israel, Ami Mayani, give a lecture and demonstrate some of his harp work, including a harp concerto. I thought, harp, guitar, I bet he'd be the perfect guy to ask. So I went up to him, 17 years old, and I said, would you write me a guitar concerto? I'm a classical guitarist. And he looked at me and he said, the guitar? What a silly, stupid instrument. No way. And I was a little stunned by this. But that night I ran into him at a party, and I said, look, I bet if I played for you, I could change your mind. So he said, well, humoring me, he said, I'll be in New York in about 4 months. If you meet me there, I'll give you a chance. So that's what happened. I played for him for about an hour, and he said, you know, I think something would be possible. And by the next year, I had a concerto. I premiered it with the Minnesota Orchestra. We then did it in Israel, and I learned a very valuable lesson early on, which is that no means just try another way and try harder. And that, as someone else said, it means not now. So that has really steeled me for a lot of the composers like John Coriano, made me wait 8 to 10 years for a yes from him. And one of the things that was exciting about this film is that the producer insisted on various archival footage must surface. And she said, well, what about that live television broadcast you did at the age of 21 of the Mayani Concerto in Israel? I said, well, I tried for 3 years to get that. I did not succeed. I gave up. I've never seen it. She said, well, we have to get it. And we got it. And I was able to see that for the first time in my life, which was very exciting. It's like seeing another person up there, but it was really very extraordinary, and to be able to have that. Other things like that surfaced as well. I had toured for 5 years with Larry Coryell and Laurindo Almeida. This was my first crossover venture. Laurindo brought bossa nova to this country, basically in the 1950s, and Larry is a well-known jazz rock guitarist. We had performed a lot, and there was a concert I knew that had been recorded for television in Mexico, had never been able to get the recording, and she said, well, we have to get that. We got it. Saw that for the first time. So you can see that it was a process of discovery for me as well. Any more questions? Yes?
Malcolm Gladwell. Wow.
You're loud, yeah.
Malcolm Gladwell recently opined that 10,000 hours of practice can make someone perhaps an expert. What are your thoughts on how much time and effort it takes to gain facility and proficiency? And is there hope for people like me who at 46 years old picked up a guitar for the first time?
Actually, picking up the guitar at 46 is a great idea because it's an instrument that doesn't really accost you. If you try that with the violin, it might be a little tricky. But the guitar, it's hard to produce a really, really bad sound because we have frets. I mean, you can buzz them, but at least they'll be in tune. And it's something that I think grows with you as you start on your journey. So yes, by all means, if you do classical, you have to grow your right hand fingernails long. That's a telltale sign of a classical guitarist. That, you know, this hand has long nails, and the other hand has short nails for the fretting. But it's never too late. You can always get joy out of music. Yes? Oh, your mic's coming. Oh, you got lots of mics coming up there.
If he's 46, I suppose my dream of learning to play cello at age 60 is really out. But I noticed you mentioned several genres, but you didn't mention blues. Do you have any interest in American blues?
I love American blues, and of course that's really at the root of so much of anything that we hear in our country. I think that when you listen to the work that Mark O'Connor wrote for the two of us to do called Strings and Threads, I recorded it on an album called Journey to the New World, and it ended up being an exploration in a way of folk music that began with me playing lute duets with myself back from 16th century England, traveling through 17th and 18th century Scotland and Ireland, crossing the ocean with the immigrants, their dreams, their hopes, their music, to the New World. And that's where Joan Baez joined me. I did the world premiere of a solo suite written for me by the late British composer John Duarte, which used and paid tribute to the songs she sang in the early part of her career. And when she heard that, she offered to sing on the album and joins me here. My folk idol, Joan Baez, I never thought I'd even meet her, joins me in a couple of songs, Wayfaring Stranger and Go Away From My Window. And Mark O'Connor and I were about to premiere the violin suite that he wrote for the two of us. And I said, Mark, we've got to add this to the album. So that is almost a historiography of violin folk music and the evolution through the 13 states of the early part of American history. And there is a blues section in there. Certainly, if you go to a museum like in Nashville, that pays tribute to the, what is the name of that museum? It's the famous Country Hall of Music fame, yes. There's a whole section on blues. Yes, the Country Music Hall of Fame, yes. There's a whole section on blues because that is really at the heart of all of our music. So yes, great interest. Yes?
Good afternoon. I'm just curious, since blues came up, do you have a name for your guitar?
It's not Lucille, but you know what? I am playing at Lucille's, the B.B. King Jazz Club on November 20th. Really? It's in New York City. I'm avoiding your question because I don't have a name for my guitar. But I'll just run with this for a moment. I am playing in New York City at a jazz club, blues club, B.B. King's, the Lucille Room, and I'm playing with the trio that I have called Guitar Passions, which is penned after the last album I did, which had a lot of guests from Nancy Wilson from Heart, Steve Vai, Stanley Jordan, Steve Morse, and others. So my compatriots on this tour and at Lucille's, at B.B. King's, on November 20th is Romero Lubambo, a wonderful jazz guitarist from Brazil, and Stanley Jordan, who invented the tapping technique. He plays the guitar like a keyboard. It's unbelievable. So we did an 18-city tour last February, and I think what really knocks audiences out is that they've never heard a combination from 3 different genres put together quite like this before. And that's what I find exciting, is to meet these extraordinary and creative people and find a way of making music together. Yes?
How old were you when you started playing, and did you feel pressure as a classical guitarist, from peers and other people to play rock guitar or some other genre of guitar music?
I actually started by default and by accident. Our family, when I was 9 years old, went to live in Italy. My father is a scientist, and he was invited to do some consulting work there. So as we arrived in our town near Milan, my older brother said he wanted guitar lessons. So my parents got very excited because they determined that there was a teacher commuting to our town from Milan every week who had studied with Segovia and was concertizing all over Italy. So they took my brother, Ira, to interview with him. And the moment he walked in and saw that the guy had long fingernails on the right hand, remember that? And that it was classical, he said, oh, no, 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 I want to be Elvis Presley. This is not for me. So that evening, we had a little family conference, and my parents said, well, someone's got to study with him. And my mother said, well, I can't do it. I've got a 10-month-old baby. This is impossible. My other brother was going to continue his lessons with oboe. So I said, all right, I'll do it. I didn't know what classical guitar was, but I liked folk music, and I figured how far afield can that be? And that's how I started. And it was really a hobby. I must have put in a grand total of 20 minutes a day. And when we moved back to Minneapolis, where I grew up a year later, I got very involved in, as you saw, model rockets. And as Michelle Obama said, the wonderful First Lady, she said, well, her father used to say, you can't go out and launch your rockets until you put in an hour on the guitar. How cool is it to be introduced by the First Lady? I mean, that is just one of the great events of my life, to play at the White House. And then, after a few years of very intense rocketry, I won a competition, and the award was to perform with the Minnesota Orchestra. I was 14 years old. So I walked out on stage. There were 5,000 people in the audience, and I thought, wow, this is even more exciting than sending my worms and grasshoppers into space. I think I'll become a guitarist. And that's what happened, literally overnight. I shifted gears. I started practicing 5 hours a day, and suddenly I thought, well, I'm sounding a little better now than I did on an hour. And I discovered that the more I put into it, the more I enjoyed it. So I never had any pressure from my parents other than, at least get that hour in before you go out and send your worms up. But everything else was very self-motivated, and I'm grateful for that because I know it came from me. We've got someone here who's very amused by the worm thing, right? Yeah. And you know what's really interesting? Life works in strange ways. I discovered a travel guitar. I like to go to exotic places, whether it's the Galapagos. John Coriano, in fact, and I, after premiering the piece, went to the Galapagos together with two friends of ours to celebrate. And if you go to my website, you can see a very cool picture of the two of us with a giant lizard ready to eat something, and in the Galapagos. And why am I telling you this story? There is a reason. Oh, yes. So it was important for me to have something I could travel with that would allow me to practice, but that wouldn't be devoured by insects, because I go to the Amazon. I just came back from Costa Rica. So I learned that there was a travel guitar called a soloist, which is a neck, one 9-volt battery, three aluminum tubes that pop on, and so that you could hold it just like a regular guitar, and you listen with earphones or plug it in. I've even used it on stage in sound systems. And in 1995, I got a call from an astronaut. This shows you the synchronicity of life. I got a call from an astronaut. You might have heard of him. He became very famous recently. Chris Hadfield went up on the last space shuttle. You're nodding there. Millions of Twitter followers and all kinds of things. Anyway, and he did an in-space live dual broadcast from Earth and space with bare naked ladies. Did you see him do that? It was incredible. He played guitar and sang with them from space. So Chris called me and he said, I just discovered this travel guitar you endorse. I was walking in Houston in a park and someone was playing it. And he said, I want to bring this up in the Space Shuttle Atlantis. I'm going to be launching in 1995, and we have an astronaut band on board. How do you feel about that? Oh, I said, I really like that idea. And so he ended up taking that and a CD of mine, American Landscapes. In fact, that's the John Coriano CD, the one that I will be performing tomorrow, recorded on an album called American Landscapes. So what happened was, as you know, or maybe you don't, NASA has to weigh very carefully every little millionth of an ounce that is put into a space vehicle to make sure that the weight is proper. So Chris started calling me the Monday before the Saturday launch to give me an update. I think it's going to look good. So far, it's so good. He called me Tuesday. He called me Wednesday, Thursday. By the time he called me Friday, he said, we have a green light from NASA to take up both your travel guitar and your CD. And when you see this film, you can see the CD, American Landscapes, with John Coriano's name on it, floating weightless in the space shuttle with Earth outside the window. So here was this 12-year-old kid launching rockets. How did I know I'd end up in space? That's pretty wild. Yes?
Hi. So I'm just so excited that you're here, so thank you so much. I was really interested by your mentioning of your dedication to music as a young child, and I'm a student here at the Clinton School, and I studied music in my undergrad, and so I'm trying to figure out how music and social change come together to make the world a better place. So how have you observed music as a tool for social change in your work all over the world?
Well, certainly in the world where there are lyrics and ballads. I mean, you look at somebody like Joan Baez marching hand in hand with Martin Luther King during the race riots, and her songs speak to a time where every moment and word counted as something important. Same thing during the Vietnam War. When I play an instrument that doesn't have lyrics, it's a little bit different. But there are ways that I can use music to be expressive. So for example, I think one of the most poignant moments of my life was when I was asked to perform at the first memorial for 9/11 at Ground Zero. So this would have been in 2002, September 11th. This would be the time that the family members came for the first time to the grounds where this horrible tragedy took place. And I was only one of a handful of musicians asked to be part of this. We were performing during the reading of the nearly 3,000 names. It was being broadcast all over the world on all the television networks. And my first thought was, how am I going to be able to do this? This was such, being a New Yorker myself and having been there at the time, this is such a powerful emotional experience. How am I going to keep it together when I walk out there? That was my worst fear. But of course I said yes, because called to duty, you say yes for something like this. And I'll never forget the sensation of walking out on the stage. I'd just been chatting backstage with Hillary Clinton, who was one of the opening speakers, walking out on the stage, and there were 24,000 family members and survivors holding up, many of them holding up posters of their lost loved ones. There was no separation from the stage to me. It was literally like you are, right in front, and looking into people's eyes, and I thought, this is why I'm on the planet. This is why I'm here. It's to provide healing, to be part of this process, and this is why I play music. So it ended up becoming, in a way, the easiest thing I've ever done, because it had such purpose and meaning to it from a deep inner place of truth. And what I decided to do after that experience was every time I would play a concert and do an encore, I would reference this event that I had performed on and play one of the pieces that I had performed. And my God, you can't imagine what happened. After every concert, people would come up to me and say, I'm so grateful you did that. I lost a brother or sister or father or a friend. And I realized this really does have a tremendous impact. And they were just so grateful to be acknowledged and remembered, and that music was a part of that journey that could help to heal the pain that they were going through. And there was one performance, I think it might have been in South Carolina or North Carolina, and it was with orchestra. And afterwards, I'd done the same thing. One of the violinists came up to me and she said, my brother worked at the World Trade Center. And she said, he was supposed to go to work that day, but he overslept. But his best friend died. And she said, when this broadcast took place on September 11th, 2002, and I heard these musicians, I said, I hope someday I get a chance to thank them for what they did and what it meant to me. Yes?
Would you define classical guitar and distinguish it from other kinds of guitar music for me? And then in which camp would you put the work of Carlos Montoya?
Well, Carlos Montoya was a great flamenco guitarist, and I actually grew up listening to him in Manitas de Plata. And of course, we just lost one of the great ones, Paco de Lucia, very recently. Flamenco guitar is really the music of the gypsies, the Spanish gypsies from Andalusia. And it is almost like the Spanish folk tradition of guitar. What I play as a classical guitarist, the instrument is actually very similar. Nylon strings for the first three trebles, and then metal wound bass. We also play with our fingernails without a pick. But the difference is that as a classical guitarist, I'll do things like Bach fugues, and music from the Renaissance, and music from the classical period, and a lot of contemporary composers who have written for me. So it's just a different style of music. When you compare it with other styles that use a steel string, then you actually get into a different instrument. You saw Steve Vai with an electric guitar, using a pick, wah-wah pedal, all of that. So the instrument is the most versatile, I would say, on the planet, and the one that I play, because there are no keys, there are no pedals, there's no bow, it's all direct contact with the fingers. You can change the color of the sound in a remarkable number of infinite ways, playing by the bridge, the angle of flesh, playing towards the fingerboard to get a range of sound that goes anywhere from very metallic to very beautiful, dolce, sensuous, caressing. All of that is possible on the instrument. And I can't think of any other that can do that. We can also do what a singer does, which is have that cry in between the sound, in between the pitches, by what we call portamento. You can't do that on a piano. And we have that percussive quality that is the nature of flamenco guitarists as well. Sure.
Hey.
Oh, there you are.
How you doing? With the development of classical guitars as like acoustically in the last, say, 30 years, like double tops, lattice bracing, that sort of thing. Which do you prefer? Or do you like more of a traditional, like Torres style instrument, or do you like something that projects more? Just wanted to get your thoughts about that.
It's a good question. What kind of guitar do I like to play? Since there have been so many innovations with the instrument now. I used to play spruce guitar exclusively, and then I discovered cedar, and now I play cedar exclusively. I used to play single top. Now I play a double top exclusively. So I think that it's important to be part of the discovery that guitar makers are doing very actively, and the instrument I play now is made by Tony Mueller from Germany. It is a cedar double top, which means that a very thin layer of wood is connected to another thin layer of wood, in this case cedar. Instead of using an artificial material as the sandwich in between, he uses balsa wood. The idea behind doing this sandwich top is to create a very thin soundboard that can vibrate more, be louder, project, and respond very fast, but still have the support so that it doesn't sink in. And I really love this instrument. It's very special. Yes?
What happens if you break a nail?
I want to talk to you afterwards in my office. It is the one fear we all have. But I always travel with glue in my guitar case, crazy glue, silk, and a special powder. So if I have to do a quick fix, and artificial nails as well, if I have to do a quick fix, I can do it. I did have one really bizarre experience, which was, I remember leaving to play for a concert and quickly reaching down to lift up my luggage and smashing my fingernail on the floor, and and I had to go to the airport, and this fellow who had developed a new type of fingernail that he was bragging about had just sent me a packet of them, and I just grabbed that and I said, well, I'll figure out how to use this when I get there. So I opened it up, and it was just a tome. It read like a novel. I had no time to read the instructions. I had to do a rehearsal. And there were these long talons. Well, clearly you had to cut them and shape them. So I cut one, and there was a little glue blob. It wasn't glue, it was some sort of, it looked like silicone, but it was an adhesive that would not damage your nail. That was what he was very excited about, that you could do something that wouldn't destroy your nails like crazy glue does. So I put one of these on, and I was doing the concerto by Christopher Rouse. And it begins with these big Raschiato strums. And of course, the thing flew off. And I'm telling the conductor, who I'd never worked with before, I said, excuse me just a moment, I have to go get my fingernail. And he's like, what? So I go get the nail, and I put it back on, and somehow it flew off again, and somehow I made it through the rehearsal. And then I read the instructions when I came home. And you're supposed to file the edge of it, bevel it, put a piece of tape on so it doesn't catch on the string and fly off. But you're supposed to shape it with heat. Well, how am I going to get heat in a hotel room? So I had to fry it on a coffee maker. So I spent a couple hours, I made the perfect nail. And it said it lasts for a while. The next morning I woke up, and the fingernail was on my wrist. So clearly a while wasn't overnight. So I was able to use that. I put another glue blob on, came to the rehearsal, everything went great. I was doing two concerti, Rouse on first half, Joaquin Rodrigo's Concierto de Aranjuez on the second half, both demanding works. Everything went fine. I thought, you know what? Leave well enough alone. I'll just keep it like that and go to the concert. So that evening was the concert. Begin with that Raschiato, everything's just going great. At the end of the first movement, there's another one of those, the nail flies off into an audience of 2,000. The floor is black, the nail is white. I figured surely, and I didn't see where it went. I said, surely it's got to be next to me, I'll find it. So the second movement starts with an orchestral introduction, and I'll just imitate this for a moment. So there I am sitting while the orchestra is playing, and I'm going. Some people told me they thought this was part of the piece. I couldn't find the nail. So then I played. The second movement wasn't scary because it's slow. You can just refinger with other fingers. It's really very hard to play when your nail is gone, chopped off, because that's what catches the string. So then there's this big, long orchestral solo, and I thought, will I do the unthinkable? Well, the third movement is coming up, and it's filled with very fast 16th notes. There's no way I can refinger it. 15 against 16, 9 against 8, extremely complicated, all worked out, programmed. I can't refinger that. Will I do the unthinkable? Yes. I'll imitate what that looked like. So the orchestra's playing. I get up. I start wandering around, looking for the nail. I couldn't find it. So now I think, okay, the second movement's coming to an end. Will I do the unthinkable? That last movement is scary. Yes, I will. The conductor has his hands up, ready to start the downbeat of the third movement. I go. Now, this was an odd hall in that there was an enormous 20-foot pit in front of me and the audience, and the pit was about the distance from here to almost that wall. It was very strange. I thought, well, we've got to find my nail. I'm a little bit obsessive. So I explained to the conductor what happened. At this point, I had to let the audience in on it because they thought I was a lunatic. And I said, we're going to try to find the nail in the pit. So the conductor, good sport, goes down into the pit, along with the stagehand. Now, this fellow was actually being considered for the job of this orchestra. He was a guest candidate. He didn't get the job, but it wasn't because of me. The orchestra really loved this experience and talked about it on and on and on forever. Well, they couldn't find my fingernail. Now I had no choice. I had to play the third movement as it was. They looked for 5 minutes. By now, the orchestra, the audience was amused, and someone said they thought it had flown into them. So I started to play, and I just willed it to happen. I mean, there was actually really no problem, and I should have just done that all along from the beginning. The reviewer had a field day with this. So yes, if I lose a nail, it's not a good thing. Yes?
I wanted to thank you for what you've done for the youth of our world with your work at Juilliard.
Thank you.
What do you think is the greatest challenge for that department right now?
The greatest challenge to the Juilliard guitar department, or all guitar department, or all music departments?
Just guitar in general.
Guitar
worldwide.
in general. Well, I think what's very exciting to me is to be able to hand select really the cream of the crop, and I'm very grateful that Juilliard allows me to take the people that I want to and very few. I really only have time to devote to a handful of students, which can range from 3 to 5. And that means that they get incredible opportunities. So this year, I have a student from Australia, from Korea, and from China. And within their first semester, they were already invited to perform at Lincoln Center and do their own recital. So we were sitting at our studio in the building at Juilliard, which overlooks 65th Street, which heads right into Broadway, and we're on the 5th floor. And I said, you know what? There were a stream of 12 light boxes that go all the way to Broadway, and these are huge light boxes, huge. And on them, they project images of whatever's happening at Lincoln Center. I said, I bet your light box must be up by now. So there I am, leaning against the window, I said, oh my God, there it is. And there was the picture of the three of them projected all the way up through Broadway on the 12 light boxes. So this is what happens at Juilliard. It's a very special place. And we have our own YouTube channel, Juilliard Guitar. You can visit that. It'll be updated every year with the new students I have. I just think that there's some of the really greatest, most talented people, and I look forward to seeing them flourish. I've had students from over 20 different countries. And if you go to my Facebook page, you can see the picture of them standing next to their light box.
You mentioned that you play with guitarists with many other genres, and improvisation is a major part of those other genres. So
For them. For them.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to ask, how you handle that. Is there
Right.
a role for improvisation, or do you just work it out ahead of time? How do you handle that mix?
I was asked about improvisation. I go with the flow, and the musicians that I play with do most of the improvising. And we're able to choose arrangements and works that allow me to do what I'm good at and let them flourish at what they're good at. So, for example, one of the centerpieces of the program I do with Guitar Passions with Stanley Jordan and Romero Lubambo is an arrangement Lorindo Almeida made for me to play with him and Larry Coryell when we used to tour together, of the slow movement of Rodrigo's Concierto de Aranjuez, but it has a twist. I play the part Rodrigo wrote, and in this case, Romero plays the orchestral part where I asked him to improvise and do it in a jazz style. And what Stanley does is at the end, instead of the big orchestral solo, it's a bossa nova free-for-all improv, which is just wild and exciting. Steve Morse does it in our recording Guitar Passions. So then when that happens, I ended up joining Romero and doing the bossa improv. So there really are many ways to make this kind of combination work. That's one of them.
I think we have time for one more question, and if I don't see any hands up, I'll ask it myself, if that's all right. I'm absolutely struck by the range of this discussion, particularly with respect to the repertoire that you've talked about today that spans much more than the majority of a millennia. And you've also touched upon the incredible versatility of the instrument. Could you paint us a picture, or perhaps the way you would do it with your 3 guitar students at Juilliard right now, of what the future of classical guitar looks like, keeping all of that in mind?
Sure. One of the things that fuels me is having composers write for me. So right now, for example, I was telling Philip about this earlier, I'm excited because the jazz composer and musician Chris Brubeck is writing a concerto for me that is a tribute to his late father, Dave Brubeck. And I will premiere that in April with the Maryland Symphony. Elizabeth Schulz will be conducting that. And what's exciting is that Chris has invited me to be part of the early process of his compositional technique, showing me sketches and saying, well, what do you think of that? Would you like me to change anything? And as a result of that process, we replaced the entire slow middle section with a beautiful ballad that his father had written, because Chris is still mourning the loss of his father, which happened this year. And I said, I think this will really speak to your heart. And as a result, it's really changed the work. The last movement has a very funky Middle Eastern groove. The opening section starts fast, is very jazz-like. So I'm really thrilled to be a consultant, in a way, for the journey that he's making writing the work. Another composition that's being written for me right now, as we speak, is by the composer Richard Danielpour. I'm collaborating with a wonderful Met Opera star, Isabel Leonard, in song recitals for voice and guitar. And Carnegie Hall, in collaboration with the Harris Theater Chicago, has commissioned a song cycle by Richard to be written for the two of us to premiere at Carnegie a year from now. So I think, in answer to your question, Philip, about the future of the instrument, I think what will keep it continually alive is the constant infusion of new ideas and new collaborations that we can't predict at this point, but that will take flight.